Today we're taking a look at the aftermath in Vancouver after the JT Miller trade. With Miller now under contract, how will they gain that much needed cap flexibility that their GM and president have talked about for much of the offseason? Plus we're taking a look at some trade rumors in Minnesota. Plus, could Patrick Kane end up on Long Island? Yes, another team that we want to mention a possibility later into the year that Kane might possibly end up with. Plus we have some signings and some UFA rumors to take a look at as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, we do have another confirmed signing. The San Jose Sharks have signed Evgeny Svechnikov to a one-year contract. It's a two-way deal, however. It's a $750,000 deal at the NHL level, but he is getting a lucrative AHL contract should he end up playing in the minors for $350,000, which is pretty high compared to what a lot of American Hockey League players make. Of course, Svechnikov just recently changed agencies. He's now represented by Gold Star after changing that recently. Obviously had a hard time getting a contract, but San Jose gets him under a one-year deal here. They had some openings that should be able to possibly have a better chance of making the NHL roster, so it makes sense after a year in Winnipeg. The former first-round pick in Detroit has kind of struggled to put it together and piece things together for a regular NHL opportunity. So we'll see how things work out for him in San Jose. Around some other rumors, some other unsigned players. A guy like Evan Rodriguez, still unsigned after back-to-back one-year deals in Pittsburgh. I really thought last year was a really breakout season in a way for him. Had a real solid campaign and is yet to be signed. I think a lot of this has to do with what a lot of other players have been facing, is that teams are trying to navigate through their cap issues, free up some money. He's got apparently 7 to 8 teams in the mix, including Calgary and Pittsburgh. Obviously the pair where he played the past couple seasons, but teams just don't have the room. I mean, coming off a $1 million one-year deal, I mean, I know many expected him to probably get a decent raise after how he played in the numbers he put up last year, but at this point, I would think that that's pretty unlikely. I mean, he might get more than $1 million, but I don't think it's going to be drastically more. There's just not a lot of cap room out there to kind of go around. Now, the Edmonton Oilers are also expected to bring in at least one forward with some experience on a PTO, or maybe do a signing as well, because they were rumored to be involved in Sam Gagner, who ended up going to the Winnipeg Jets, and Rodriguez could be a player that they do look at. But there's others, there's still a decent amount of players out there that are expected to get some sort of an opportunity, whether it be a one-year deal or a PTO at the very least. But we're looking at Sonny Milano, Zach Aston-Reese, Tyler Mott, Tyler Ennis, and Derek Brassard are all searching for NHL work. There's probably a few others out there as well, but those are some more prominent names with NHL experience that are expected to get opportunities. Whether I think guys like Milano, Mott, Aston-Reese probably have a good chance at getting a one-year deal. Brassard and Ennis might have to go on PTOs, hard to say. On the blue line, you're looking at guys like Danny DeKeyser, Anton Strawman, Calvin DeHaan. I know Danny DeKeyser's agent recently made comments saying that they were optimistic that he could get a one-year deal, that there were some teams that they were talking to. But again, like a lot of teams, are trying to move money and figure out a way to make things fit, which is challenging right now. So, when you see teams free up space, then it could be bringing in one of these players. So we'll see as we're getting a little bit closer to training camp. There's still some time, but I'm sure some of these guys must be getting a little bit nervous that they're not going to get a contract for the coming season. As I mentioned as well in the trade rumor and trade talk front, and I have a few teams I want to discuss today, one being Vancouver. Now, of course, JT Miller just signed a long-term lucrative 7-year contract here with the Vancouver Canucks. He's a player that many people expected was likely going to be traded. Well, of course, that is not happening now. Not only does he have a new contract, but they give him a no-move clause. Now, of course, his old contract still has a year left on it, so it is, I guess, not completely absurd to think maybe they trade him, but it doesn't make sense that they would even entertain that after just working on getting this contract completed, right? So Miller is staying in Vancouver for the long haul. That much we now know. It kind of surprised a lot of people. Based on all the comments from Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin, they went on and on and on during this offseason about how this team is not a contender. They've been, in and out of the playoffs. There's no reason this team should be right up against the cap and be capped out, and that they were looking for cap flexibility. And they expressed publicly, Rutherford did as well, concerns over giving a long-term lucrative deal to a player, getting ready to enter the age 30 season. So, certainly you might gotta wonder what comes next now. What happens now? Because not to say that Miller's not worth the money, like I talked about in the video I made when the contract was first signed. I like Miller a lot as a player. He's a real good leader, real hard-working player. He can be a difference maker out there. Had a phenomenal year last year. I don't think he's slowing down any, but my concern is going to be, can he keep up that 99-point production for at least 4 to 5 years? Because it's a 7-year deal. The last couple of years, you typically can live with the fact that it's not going to be as strong. Production might be down a bit, but you got to get past the halfway point of that contract, at least 1 year past that, and have some decent productive years. And it's just that simple. Otherwise, it works out terribly in your favor, right? So they also have Bo Horvat to sign, their captain, and they've made all indications point to the fact that Bo is going to be extended too. So that's going to eat up a lot of money in their cap. Now, a couple of guys they could probably love to move would be Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Tyler Myers. Those contracts are going to be almost impossible to move. Myers still has 2 years left at $6 million. OEL has more term and more money than that. That's not going to be easy to do. Now, could they maybe move Myers after this year with 1 year left? That might be possible, but the problem is that you have to add sweeteners and kind of pay teams to take on your bad deals. And then it gets more expensive on that front with the future, right? So who are they going to move? Somebody really needs to go, in my opinion, to give them that cap flexibility they've been talking about. They're already not in a great cap spot for the coming year. And now they have that much more money tied up going forward. Could it be Connor Garland? Could Garland be the guy to go? I know there was a lot of talk after 1 year in Vancouver that the new regime might not have been overly thrilled and happy with how he fit with the group. So maybe he becomes the trade piece. But I do think like all the things that they talked about are things that made sense. Rutherford and Alvin seem to have a good handle on how to do things. But then signing this Miller deal kind of threw everybody for a surprise, if you will. I think it's fair to say that. A lot of people were shocked by it. So now that that's done, the question becomes who goes next. And I think honestly that they turn to a guy like Connor Garland could be the player to move. So we'll watch the Vancouver Canucks this year. I don't think that there's really a major rush to make a trade. Maybe they do as we get closer to camp or during camp or something like that. But it could be something to take your time, see how this year goes. If they're not looking like they're going to be a playoff team, maybe somebody goes at the deadline. Hard to say, but I think Vancouver's a team who can at least be in the conversation for playoffs. And depending on how they do, I think we'll probably decide how they proceed, at least during the coming season. Now, the Minnesota Wild, as we know, just recently made a trade not too long ago, sending defenseman Dmitry Kulikov over to the Anaheim Ducks. Now, of course, Kulikov frees up some more money in the Wild salary cap situation. According to CapFriendly.com, they now have about $5.7 million in space, which does a couple of things. As we talked about in that video when the trade first happened, I said basically it's a pure cap dump. It gets them a little extra cap space, and it allows an opportunity for a guy like Kalen Addison, who's been a good prospect defenseman, put in his time in the minors, and is really deserving, I think, of a more of a full-time chance. Well, now he has a much better opportunity to grab a roster spot in the NHL and remain with the big club for the season. So it gets an opportunity for him. And of course, there's been some other rumors that the Wild might want to add another forward. We've talked about that here in recent days as well. And they very well might still do that. But with this $5.7 million in space, there is some speculation now that they might actually be willing to, if a team like to take a bad contract from another team. If a team has one, it wouldn't obviously be able to be too long a term or too much money. But if a team really needs to shed like, a $3.5 million player, that's something that they could consider doing for the right price, of course. So, it makes you wonder with teams that are going to be looking to maybe make some moves here, if Minnesota might be able to take advantage of that and build for their future, depending on what they can get for a bit of a sweetener there. Of course, they have a couple of roster spots to fill, but they could fill them internally. You have players like Marco Rossi, like Addison, as I mentioned. There could be, rookies that come in that they don't need a lot of space to squeeze them in, right? So maybe they could basically rent out the other cap space that they've been able to add here if they can get whether it be a first-round pick or a good-looking prospect or something that's what they would value as what they consider a significant future asset. So just keep an eye on Minnesota as maybe being one of those teams that might be in the mix for some of these other trades that might end up taking place later, where teams need to kind of get a bad contract out of the way to make things happen. So we'll see how that goes. Now, Patrick Kane, we've talked about him in a variety of fashions here in the last few weeks. He's been a hot topic in the NHL world. Of course, as we know, as of right now, just to clarify, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, the two longtime Blackhawks, multi-time Stanley Cup champions, have not informed the team or Kyle Davidson, the general manager, that they want a trade. Right now, they said they're happy to go into the season and just kind of see how things go. I think it's fair to say, based on what they've said, that if Chicago surprises anybody, which is not expected to happen, in a good way, and somehow battles for playoffs, they'd probably stick around and try to help. But if Chicago is well out of it, which is kind of expected, many think that there's a high probability that Kane and Toews, or at least Kane more likely because he'd have way better value, that he'll go to them and later in the year say, okay, I don't mind if you trade me. Here's a couple of teams I'd consider. Right? Now, we've talked a bit about a few other teams, but one name that kind of came up here is a little bit surprising on my part to hear it. But, of course, I was listening to the Cam and Strick podcast with Andy Strickland and Cam Jansen. And Andy Strickland, of course, is a pretty well-connected reporter for Bally Sports. And so, of course, has his own podcast. Has lots of sources within the NHL. Goes on to talk about, they were talking about the future of Kane. And he speculated as the New York Islanders maybe being a team to watch here as we get later into the season. If Kane decides he's willing to move, that they might be able to be in the mix. And his reasoning is this. For starters, many people that are close to the Islanders, including like Lou Lamoriello, seems like based on the lack of activity, there's some that feel, and I've seen other people say this and listening to a variety of NHL reporters. Now, there's some that are pretty pessimistic on them too, but there's some that are optimistic, thinking that there was a lot of X factors that kind of factored into the Islanders' poor season last year, and that they're a prime candidate to bounce back. You get a good start. You don't have that big road trip at the beginning of the year. You don't have all the COVID infections that they dealt with. And they had a lot of external things, injuries. There was a lot. And I will say for sure that definitely played a role. I have no doubt that they would have done better. And could they have maybe made the playoffs? Maybe. But I still think that at the same time, though, that teams around them in their division in the last year or two have made a lot of moves to get better. And they just have a much stiffer competition now. Like, obviously, the Rangers are now pulling ahead of them. You got the Carolina Hurricanes. You still got the Capitals and the Penguins that are still very much in the mix. Columbus has had a big offseason. The Flyers still, to me, look like a little bit of a mess. So, the Devils, I don't know. I'm not really sure what to think of the Devils either right now. But, the Islanders are looking at, maybe being in 5th or 6th place, possibly, right? And it's not because that they're really taking major steps back. It's just that these other teams are younger and maybe better now. It's just quite possible. The Islanders are a team that has had a ton of success after Tavares left in the pre-John Tavares era. They did really well for a while, but the team is getting older and it's lacking a couple of things. They've made some good moves. Lou obviously was a back-to-back GM of the Year award winner, but the team is missing things. They need another scoring forward, no doubt. They also could use another defenseman, or at least maybe a defenseman. I guess we'll see how training camp goes on that front. The Islanders may be able to address that internally, but I really think that they're missing a game breaker. Ideally, somebody who can play with Barzal. And right now, without that, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to score their way to too many victories, at least not enough to really be high in the standings. At least that's what, a lot of people think. But there's some that are pretty high on them saying that they'll bounce back. And I really hope for the fan base's sake that they do. It's tough without seeing changes to really be on board to believe that right now. And for that, I'm going to have to say seeing is believing. And until I see it, it's going to be tough to think that that's really likely. But assuming they do bounce back and they are a team that's in the playoff hunt, Strickland thinks about the long relationship that Lou and Kane have together from the many times they've worked together through USA Hockey on an international stage, that maybe Lou could influence Kane to come to Long Island. I mean, it's hard to say if that's possible or not, but he wouldn't rule it out, and he thought they might be a wild card team to be in the mix here for Kane's services should he decide he's willing to move on from Chicago. Now, in my opinion, if Kane is willing to entertain this at all, I guess one benefit here, Chicago would be one of the teams that might be willing to take on a bad contract in return, like a Josh Bailey. Of course, Bailey's a contract the Islanders have been actively trying to move for some time and have had no luck doing so. Now, of course, to get Kane and also have them take a contract back like Bailey, they're going to have to pay a pretty price. So you're talking for sure a first-round pick. I have no doubt that would have to be included. And at the very least, a couple of interesting prospects that are, they're going to probably be asking for some of their higher-end guys like Ratu, Dufour. I don't know who else they're going to want, but they don't have a deep prospect pool. So my concern for the Islanders in adding Kane, if it's only going to be for a playoff run, if they can get themselves in the mix, I would be awfully careful with that because they just don't have a lot of strong future assets to give away for a one-shot deal here. And if it doesn't work out, then those are gone. Assets that are gone for good. As much as unless you're like a for sure cup contender, I don't know. It'd be nice to see Lou finally get off his keister here and make a move to add a top scorer. But if it's not going to be for a long-term situation, I just don't know that it makes sense to give up any kind of, important future assets. So as much as what Strickland was talking about does make some sense that there could be a connection there. They do have an existing working relationship through USA Hockey. That's all true. It's all good points. I just don't know if I would do it if I were him now, unless he can convince Kane to sign an extension. I just don't think it's something I would entertain. Like I said, I'm not sure that the Islanders are going to be a playoff team. They have some work to do. They have some proving to do to a lot of people. But it will be interesting to see if they can get themselves in the mix. It's just a risky move, in my opinion, and I just don't know that I would do it if I were them. But I'd love to know what you thought. I thought it was an interesting idea, something I want to bring up, see what the audience here thought of that potential move, and we can talk about it further in the comments. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.